let's turn to your game,
Yeah. Okay.
which, as I
Yeah.
understand, is still not quite named.
No,
Um,
absolutely not. I have everything but the name.
right,
Yeah, it's,
and I want to know a little bit more uh,
mhm.
about something specific.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
to do that, we need to
Mhm.
look at the adversarial entities that you have sent me
Mhm.
and talk a little
Yes.
bit about that kind of thing in this kind of game.
Yes.
Uh, so tell me a little. I will give you a couple of observations, and you can tell me if I'm right, and
Yes.
then I will ask you. Then, if depending on the answers, then I will ask some more questions.
Perfect.
So I'm looking at the ghoul, and I am looking at the goblin,
Yes.
and I am looking at all of your usable metrics. I have talked very positively about this before. That your graphic means of describing things in terms of personality and body and dexterity and things like that. Your graphic means of doing this and uh, your summaries of the creatures, in
Yeah.
terms of all the little symbols, and what they are resistant to, and
Yeah.
the summaries of the little heart chart that you have,
Yeah.
and all of these things. It's quite clever, but cleverness is not enough. The question is, how well do they work? And looking at them, they look extremely functional. You could take
Thank
off
you.
all the cute little pictures and it would be a very functional set of metrics, and that's great, right? That's it.
The idea of the picture is that I'm trying a visual approach to try and make some
I'm not objecting to it at all. I am only
Okay.
pointing out that
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the bones that your pictures sit on look very strong.
Okay.
So
Perfect.
then
Thank you.
we move to the blocks of text, and the pedigree
Yeah.
of the game, the inspiration for the game is very, very clear. We've talked about this before, that in fourth edition D&D, the monster blocks are among
Yes.
the strongest part of the game. I mean, they are great.
Yeah.
If only player character
Yeah. It's
blocks were that easy, right? Then so, but
yeah.
the monster blocks are just incredible, astoundingly usable. So this is building on that
Yes.
same logic, and it's very clear. So, given the utility
Yes.
for
Yeah.
this, which is all about, it begins when we roll for surprise,
Mhm.
and then I know exactly what to do with either your goblins or your ghouls.
Yes.
So, those are my observations. And
Go ahead.
now here's my question. What's the bigger matrix of play that these encounters sit in? So if we were to look at fourth edition, and if we weren't playing it stupid, but we were actually reading the fucking rules and playing it, then we would
Yeah.
have things like quests, major and minor
Yeah.
quests, and we would also have some form of situations in which skill challenges made sense, whether they are social,
Yes.
intellectual, or physical. That we would have some kind
Yes.
of situation where making these skill rolls isn't just a speed bump, but it's really something to do, right?
Yes.
So if we have those, and we have some players who have been assertive enough to, to call for quests, you have a role playing leader, a game master, I suppose, who is responsible enough to provide choices among things that can be major quests.
Yes.
Then why the goblins are attacking now begins to make a lot of sense.
Yes.
What
Yes.
is the equivalent for you?
Okay, so basically, these blends a bit with a few discussions we had recently about, situations and about preparation and stuff like that. And I think a small premise I have to make is that the stat blocks are in intention. I'm not saying this works that way. This is the goal, basically, which is to make them usable and functional, even if you have to whip out the monster out a bit out of nowhere, let's say. I mean, if you are not prepared for the encounter, the idea behind these abilities that are very detailed and very specific and aim at creating a certain kind of experience in the encounter is that you don't need to have a preparation about this encounter. You don't need to
If
prepare the
you
file.
play these goblins and ghouls, then the ability to come up with something cool pretty quick is not that bad. I mean, it's not that hard. I mean, once you
It,
see this, I completely understand that, but I am not very interested in that variable. In
okay,
fact, I
so
think we are a little too focused on this notion of how can I improvise quickly. Let's get away from that. I want to
yeah,
talk
yeah,
about
yeah.
the opposite. So
Okay,
go ahead.
so the structure of play for me is that if you look at fourth edition D&D, like the inspiration for the mechanics, I think I want to step away from that reliance on combat encounters as a balancing mechanic,
Right,
as something that has to happen and has to happen at a certain pace. I mean, nobody plays D&D that way, but
right,
they, by the rules, they should.
right.
So I'm trying to
I agree
avoid the
with you
problem.
that their almost metronomic counting
Yeah,
of this per level up is
yeah,
kind of ridiculous. And furthermore, their own rules create problems or show the problems. Okay, I will name two of the rules that show the basic problems that they should have thought through. One of them is to convert from experience points to simply having an encounter, major or minor.
yeah,
And if it's that easy, then they should get rid of experience points entirely,
absolutely.
right? Number one. So all those little points is just bullshit. That's very clear. Number two, and more significant, if you do that and then you count on your fingers, then it comes down to either five major encounters or 10 minor encounters or any combination, where the minor ones are
Yeah,
either, well, was it 10 or 2 for 1 or 5 for 1 or something like that. But some, the point is there is some unit of encounters that you're supposed to fill to get to this next level.
yeah,
And it was 10 real encounters was the big unit, which is insane. How are you going to
yeah.
do 10 major? So they knew it was insane and said, oh, you have the option to cut it in half and make it five. Well, if it is that easy to just drop it by half, literally saying
What?
it's just as good to play the game at half as many encounters, then maybe we should rethink the importance of this unit in the first place,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yes, it
So
does.
that's my logic to completely agree with you that the
Yeah,
whole notion of counting encounters or counting kills or counting whatever as a earning, your way up the ladder is really
yeah.
not very functional.
So basically, with that out of the window, this is still very much a game that has where combat is an important component. I mean, we wouldn't have all these if it wasn't important, if
Sure, sure.
people didn't
Uh-huh.
to play that. And so the general idea of play is that the GM prepares a situation. A situation is made of a few elements. It's not very far. I mean, I was doing this before reading Circle of Events, but then reading Circle of Events made my ideas much clearer in that direction because you have a place. I mean, I have my short list. You have a place, you have some NPCs, you have a problem that
Mm-hmm.
is often, very often tied directly or indirectly with some kind of monsters. So basically, what I was getting when I was preparing, adventures for playtesting or trying out, I was almost always ending up having some Hammer horror movie kind of situation. Players arrive at a small abode with the
Right.
reserved
Uh-huh.
people hiding. So I decided that I liked that in a way. So there is a component. I mean, you can create any kind of story. Like, there is. no mandate to do this has to be an investigation or something like that. But the general gist of it is that the player characters are adventurers, and a bit like in Lamentations, being an adventurer is not necessarily a socially accepted thing.
Right.
It's they're a
Torchbearer
bit of
has
a
the same thing. I know I always
yeah,
talk about Lamentations, but it's worth giving credit to
yeah.
Torchbearer too, saying,
Torchbearer
yeah,
is also a big inspiration for me because I
right,
find the dynamic for the town,
right.
village phase
The more
brilliant.
I think about it, the more, I mean, Torchbearer does, its pedigree is involved. I can see it here. Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
it's
okay.
torch.
So,
There,
given that you are thinking situationally,
yeah,
um, then we go back to our first session when I talked to you about how a character sheet changes,
yes.
right?
So yeah,
And that seems to me like one of the most difficult problems that
Ab-
you were facing. Because
absolutely,
if you
yes,
get rid of level up by earning it through kills or
yes,
fights or something, if you get rid of that, then you are looking at if you have to reorient entirely and say I'm not fixing D&D anymore. I have to think about playing this game all by itself.
yes.
What am I
Of
doing?
course,
Right? And that can be a very unsettling experience sometimes. Um, so continue. Let's say we have our characters. I know I'm going to make this
yeah.
up. That
Okay,
it is a very prosperous and peaceful little town, and you have no idea why. In fact, the characters might even think of it as a nice casual rest at last.
yes, of course,
And but of course, the people at the inn are eyeing them in a suspicious way, and everybody is just a little bit too friendly. And we all know that the townspeople are going to eat them. Okay, right?
okay,
So here we are, right, in this situation. So they are going to be captured. Well, not they are going to be captured, but the townspeople would very much like to, drug them,
yeah. Grab
dismember
them and
them, and
feed
have a
them to the
really big
ghouls.
stew. They might
Yeah,
even be talking all about the upcoming festival.
yeah,
Excellent, right? Can't wait
yes.
for the food at the festival. It's so good.
Rural
So,
all works perfectly for
oh
me
yeah,
as a
yeah. No,
reference. I
we're
mean,
we're we're, we're doing this. It's great.
yeah,
So this is all fine in terms of an entertaining convention scenario experience.
yes,
But what is it in terms of wanting to play my character as an activity, as an ongoing activity, something that I, would like to continue to do?
yes.
And
So
it's not necessary. I understand character improvement is involved, but that's not good enough.
no, no,
So
it's
what is it?
the motivation for. I mean, characters are made of two. Uh, there is basically two elements to the character, which is I have split very clearly to try and address this problem. One is the way that people fight and interact with problems, and you know what DAD calls a class. I am a rogue,
Mm-hmm,
so
mm-hmm.
I stab
Oh,
people
I
in the
remember
back.
this from your character sheet. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, go on.
And then there is a part which is more open-ended, which is originally it was, kind of a progression like a talent tree, but now it's more goal-oriented, let's say. That is something where the player says, "Who am I? I
Right.
mean, what do I care about? Who am I relative to society? What's my identity in this world?"
Mm-hmm.
And the player commitment is that of creating something that can work within the premise of the game. And the DM has tools to make sure that this part becomes relevant during the adventures. So if I
True.
created a druid
Sometimes I
and
think sometimes I think that's a little bit overstated. You will notice, for example, that when you make a venture in Circle of Hands, you don't
Mhm.
know which Circle Knights are going to be chosen.
Yeah,
So it is not your job to match the content to any of their key events. It's not your job.
of course.
And so I'm not saying what you are saying is bad, but much more of it can emerge than be planned. And planning it has a very artificial uh, feel.
Yes, I agree. And there was what I was going to add is that
Yeah.
over time I have let go of my concern that I have to do a lot to invite these. And I realize through experience that people will find something. I mean, if I
Right.
made a druid and there is enough in the setting and the situation to uh, evoke the idea that people are cutting down trees or threatening the environment, the player will find the
Right.
way. I mean,
Right.
if you look at the RuneQuest game, I think
Yeah.
the players constantly come up with things that if
Right.
I was the DM, I would be like this and say, yeah, that's I can use all of these.
Right.